Hello again, friends. Happy Tuesday to you. It's still morning for me. And so, since it's afternoon for you, I encourage warm cups of tea or whatever it might be you like to drink that's warm in the evening. I'm just going to go right ahead with, we've been talking about maybe some ideas I've been talking about. Some of you, I suppose, out there are hearing, talking about ideas about how to use this time to try and put some principles, some habits in place for the sanctification of our lives and our families' lives. And last time, I made a statement that we have to make time for prayer, and if we say that we don't have time to pray, there's something wrong and we have to do something about it. And so I'm going to continue with that topic, and lo and behold, I found out yesterday that Father Wood talked about prayer. And so this could get boring and repetitive. It could get shocking when we find out that I say different things than he does, and if I do, I'd go with him. Or perhaps it can be hopefully encouraging and edifying, as it's a 1-2 punch into the whole realm of we have to pray. So we're forming habits. We remember we had our pyramid, our hierarchical pyramid, with our sanctification at the top and the material concerns at the bottom. And since sanctification is at the top, are the one of the number one habits we have to be able to save our souls is prayer. So that's why we're going to hash it out a little bit today. We're going to be following especially the writings of St. Teresa of Avila, St. Therese, St. John of the Cross, St. Thomas Aquinas, and the great Garrigou Lagrange. I'm just going to basically acknowledge that Father Wood has probably talked to you about the basic distinctions and definitions and stuff, so we won't spend as much time on that. We know that prayer at the end of the day is going to be communicating with God. The classic spirituality definition is that it's a raising of our mind and soul to God. But we're going to get practical, right? Because that's what we're trying to do. Well, not exactly practical, because we're trying to get principles so that we can make the practical decisions in our lives. We still have to do practical things. And we don't usually think that's the case when it comes to our spiritual life or our becoming saints. For some reason, we make a disconnect. But think about anything we do that's human. I want to go to the West Coast. I'm going to go visit my brother in California. All right, well, as long as I'm heading west, I'm going at least in the right direction. But there's a whole lot of coast to the west of me. And if I need to get to one particular address in one particular city in one particular state, I really need to get those details figured out before I go too far on my journey. And we always do that. Where am I going to go? Oh, well, I'm going to this street in San Diego, and so therefore I need to start this way, and we fill up all those things. Or I'm going to get a job. I want to get a job. Okay. Well, what am I interested in? What are my options? I have to start applying, and I have to make a resume, and I have to go in for an interview, and I have to do all these things, all these practical human things that everyone takes for granted. That's just what you do to have to accomplish that. We're going to have a birthday party for little Johnny, and it doesn't say just like, it would be nice to have a birthday party for Johnny. It's, okay, well, who are we going to invite? We're going to get pizza and cake and all that sort of thing. We do that all the time with human things. It makes sense. But then it's, I have to become a saint. I'd like to go to heaven. All right, so what do you have to do? We don't usually think like that. It's, doesn't God just kind of, that it's kind of like musical talent. You're just born with it or you're not. You're going to be that saint guy. No. Yes, God does it. God is our sanctity. It is God that heals our weaknesses, perfects our soul. It's our Lord's merits and all that. But we have to do our human side. We have to do everything we can do as a human being before we can just expect God to come in and do the rest. And a lot of times we kind of stop short of that, doing everything we need to do as a human being. And it's very much the case with prayer. So we'll just try and maybe push aside some of the ideas that keep us from really growing in prayer. So what is prayer? It's communication. And there's different ways to communicate. And there's different levels of communication. Holding a baby is a way of communicating love and protection. Texting is a way of communication, but it's definitely on a lower level than human interaction. And in fact, we may take a very brief tangent possibility and just say, please don't ever replace conversation with texting. It never works. Ever. Especially in a relationship. Talking is usually pretty real. But, I mean, let's look at that. Because what do we think of when we usually think of prayer? It's sort of like, yeah, it's the words I say. It's those things I read when I pray. But what do we think of when we think of having a conversation with someone we love? Usually we're thinking of the other person and what we want to say to them. And not just the words I say. What do I want to communicate to them? What are you trying to tell me? And so prayer is, it's simply talking to someone, it's communicating, it's even just being in the presence of someone, a person, a real being. And for a lot of us, that's already a substantial change. To think that it's not just I'm speaking words out into the air or letting things bounce around in my head. It's I'm communicating with someone who's listening and wants to answer back. Well, how do we talk to people? To a certain degree, we use things that we all kind of know by heart, our greetings or the way you're going to ask permission. It's when you're going to go ask mom or dad if you can go sleep over or something. It's usually you think that one out and you know what kind of word formula is going to work for that sort of permission. We do that sort of thing all the time, sort of, standards of communication. But it's not like we're reading things to them. It's not, good morning, Mom. How are you today? I'm doing fine. I hope to... We don't communicate that way. It'd be really weird. There's no talking to. And yeah, like we said, there's different levels, perhaps, of communication. There's a big difference between really having one of those heart-to-heart conversations and, hey, how's it going? Or just enjoying each other's company. But the principle is we're communicating with God when we're talking about prayer. And the purpose is to know Him and to love Him better. To ask and to receive. All those normal things that we would use communication for, but now we're directing it towards God. So if we were talking about the levels of prayer, that's important to know. Something I'm presuming Father Wood touched upon. Well, he told me he basically touched upon that part. I don't... First level is what we call vocal prayer. And vocal prayer is literally prayer that we're using our mouth for, or using a set pattern of words, the Hail Mary. You could say it out loud, you could say it in your head. Vocal prayer is kind of like our first habits as a human being. It's like us learning how to walk or us learning how to talk. You do that with little children, it's 2 years old and you say please, say thank you, say I love you. They'll repeat those things. They don't really know what they're saying, but they are learning something. They are learning that they're just getting the basic habit, the instinct to, if I want something, I can't just go, and expect it. I have to do something. I have to say this word in order to reasonably expect it. And that's how we teach them. We give them the habits first, and later on we learn to mean it. And so vocal prayer, it's our prayer books, it's our rosaries, and they're definitely important because they give us those tools. It's like our first letters and our first words, but it's not the top. It's not let's say the best we can do when it comes to prayer. No one would want a child to just remain at the level of reading something to you or saying words that they don't understand. At some point it's, do you mean that when you say whatever it is? it can't be the top. And why? Not just because it's not even human to be able to just communicate with always a fixed formula or something that we're not necessarily giving our thought to, but because God is a spirit. He is immaterial, and the higher part of our nature is also immaterial. We're body and soul, and our soul is our intellect and will. You are your soul, knowing and loving, and that's our higher faculties. That's us at our highest level of nature, so to speak. And so we need to communicate with God there, not just on the lower level of us using our voice or memorized formulas, but on the level of our soul, our immaterial soul, to his immaterial being. That's the kind of communication that is we're able to do it, and it's our highest prerogative, so to speak, our ability to make that sort of thing. So we call that mental prayer. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily just prayer that's said in our head, but prayer that's coming from us as us. It's prayer proper, mental prayer, because it's in our own words, more or less. What it really comes down to is whether or not we're just spontaneously coming up with words, or if we're still using the words of a formula. Really, what it's coming down to is it's producing, or we are educing an act of the will. This is coming from me. It's my heart wanting to communicate something to God. We're approaching God as he is and as we are. And so it's really coming from me. There's a very huge difference. And so when we talk about mental prayer, it could be meditation, considering truths of the faith. It could be just simply adoration. It could be just simply spending time with God. We all know that story of the Curé of Ars when he asked the farmer, what are you saying to God as you are sitting so many hours in the pew? And says, I don't say much at all. I look at him and he looks at me. And that's definitely a high level of prayer, just spending time with God in his presence. The spiritual writers will go on to talk about contemplation in the proper sense of the term, a passive prayer, when God really sort of floods our faculties with his presence and passively purifies or really communicates in a way that the human faculties are not doing much. That's the highest form of prayer, contemplation. It's something we pray for and ask for and we're working towards, but we're just mentioning that right now because we're going to go back down to the level of how to build habits of prayer. So our practical side, if we understand that we have vocal prayer, mental prayer. Vocal prayer is it's our first steps, it's our first words, and it gives us the tools. It teaches us what to say. It teaches us how to approach God, what attitude we should have towards him, what we can ask of him, and things like that. That's why it's so important. But also that it's not as human, it's not as real, and it's not as high as we can be, because we have a soul and we do have our own human affections. And so if we were to just knock out a couple practical things that we want to keep in mind, what to do as far as building habits of prayer. The first, I think, is just to keep in mind how important it is. We need to keep reminding ourselves of this. Hey, there's a reason for this. The purpose. What is it? I need to connect with the source of all strength and goodness. If the whole point of our life is our salvation, and it is, how does that happen? Us dying in the state of grace. How does that happen? Not by accident. It happens by us continually purifying our intention by opening up ourselves to the work of grace in our soul continually over our whole life. And if you think of us as, or our spiritual life as, like a machine or something like that, a machine. God is the energy source. And so we have to plug in to him often to be able to keep getting that source of truth and love. Any relationship is going to falter through lack of communication. Any relationship will falter through lack of communication. It takes continual contact and reaffirmation and things like that to keep a relationship going. If God is meant to be, the one lovable, then we have to communicate with him. We need to try and get to know him And that's over and over and over again, and more and more and more. That's the purpose. That's the reason. If we're not plugging in, if we're not connecting with our Father who loves us, how will we be able to grow in our love with Him? So our purpose, we keep reminding ourselves, this is important. What's our goal? What's the object of prayer? To know and love God better, to ask things that we need of Him, to thank Him for what He's given us. We remember those sort of things from our catechism. Another practical thing to keep in mind is we got to keep reminding ourselves who we're talking to. It's a person. It is Almighty God, the three persons in the Blessed Trinity. It is our Blessed Mother. It is one of the saints. It's a person. I can't see them, but through my faith, I can believe that they are, especially... obviously, when we're talking about God, not only present, but absolutely present. Or it's surrounding me in my own soul, especially. And that's important, because if we take the time to realize I am talking to someone, we're going to be able to push that, that tendency of ours to just drift off if I'm just going to kneel down and start saying words into the air. Now, getting really practical and down to earth, believe it or not, our prayer is going to be as good as our concentration. We don't like that idea because most of us are very willing to admit that our concentration is pretty terrible. Why is that the case, that our prayer, I'm speaking a little loosely because at the end of the day, especially when it comes to the highest form of prayer, it is God's work in our soul, not just human work. The human work is us opening up ourselves to it. But we can say in a sense that our prayer is going to be as good as our concentration. Why is that? Well, remember the principle, grace builds on nature. That means that we have to do all the human things before grace can come in and do the rest. So you think of our work for our spiritual life is kind of like we're wiring our whole house that we're building. We're putting the outlets here and there, and we're running wires up there and the conduit and all this sort of thing. And we're doing all that work. For the house to actually light up, we need an energy source, and that's God. And it doesn't matter how much wiring you do, if it doesn't connect to that energy source, there's not going to be any light. So that's what we mean when we say, God's the essential of our spiritual life. But we got to do the wiring. That's the work of nature that grace can build on. And if we do all the wiring and we do it the best we can, well, then we will be able to plug in and the house will light up. And that's the light of grace. So when it comes to praying is a communication, and it's a communication done through faith, which means there's not a physical thing necessarily for me to concentrate on. So I have to do the work to be able to concentrate on Him. And that's difficult. It's difficult to concentrate, and it's not something that we're just born with. Some people have very good powers of concentration. The people that have the best powers of concentration worked on it. They practiced, just like everything else in our life. Hey, you want to get this job? Well, here's the skill you have to learn. Hey, you want to teach that class? Well, here's the subject you have to learn. You want to be a parent? Well, you got to learn how to do it. You want to play this sport? Well, start passing the ball back and forth. We have to learn skills and form habits. It's the same thing. We always take that for granted in our human life. But when it comes to our spiritual life, it's what, I have to do something over and over. Yes. We have to want it. We have to try. We have to do things because we want to change to be better. We have to form these habits. And so the habit of concentration, the ability to focus on one object in our intellect for an extended period of time. It's not easy. How do we do it? Well, you could probably talk for hours and hours about, there's all sorts of books out there that talk about, how to learn how to concentrate on things better, and that might help. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to practicing, repeating a practice, something that helps us learn how to concentrate. It could just be, if we're really unable to concentrate on anything for more than 10 seconds, we'll start with just reading to just be able to focus on something that's right in front of you. Or even writing a letter or something like that. And we kind of build ourselves up from there. We practice concentrating on something. We can use our time of prayer, if we're really busy, the time that we've reserved to pray, to practice just in then. It's like, as long as it's our goal, it's our focus, I'm going to really try and concentrate on, as many Hail Marys as I can. And when I realize I'm going off again, I calmly bring myself back to it. And I have a direction. It's not just, I can't concentrate, might as well not try. No. That's a lie to ourselves. If we just label ourselves unable to concentrate, then we're going to give up. So we practice inside and outside of our prayer time. And for concentration, the big thing is we have to remove obstacles. There's a really good book by Father Irala. He wrote a really good book called Achieving Peace of Heart, but there's another one he wrote called something about, well, that's embarrassing. It's called something about concentration. It'll come to me probably, and if I don't remember it, then I'll look it up and I'll tell you next time. Attention. Darn it. Anyway, he wrote this book about prayer and concentration, and he gave an example of if our prayer is our work desk, the more things and the more projects we have on our desk, the harder it is going to be for us to just focus on the thing we need to focus on right then and there. And what do we need to do if you're going to focus on homework? Well, okay, put the phone away, put the TV away, put the extra book away, put all that stuff away, put that that funny calendar that we like to flip through away, and if you just clear your desk until all that's left is the one piece of paper that you have to study, you're gonna have a lot of better time studying. So we have to remove obstacles in our life to concentration. What are the obstacles in our lives to concentration? Concentration, yeah. That's where you get practical. I promised my oldest sister once, who has 11 children, that I would be understanding to families with large children when I became a priest. And I am, I promise. And so it is very understandable that family prayer time, especially in a large family, is a difficult thing. However, two things there. One is we're trying to teach the children how to pray, and so we still have to do what we can to create an atmosphere of reverence as much as possible. All I'm saying is, no one's asking the impossible, but we are asking to do as much as possible, because that's what we need to do. And so if prayer is just, everyone picks a corner and we sit and, folding laundry or something like that, or whatever it is, well, that's not doing what we can to just create an atmosphere of as much as we can. If maybe someone could take a turn and hold the baby outside so that he's not the circus show in the middle of the family rosary, well then great, that's better. We don't have to force it. He's not learning how to say the rosary by getting everyone's attention during the middle of the rosary. We find ways, and it's something we just have to work out. But at the same time, especially for parents or older kids, we have to find time to practice and to pray by ourselves, to not just say, oh well, my prayer time is the family rosary, and that's a good amount of time, and that's when we do it, and it's kind of a show because we're all really distracted and we're clicking at the kids the whole time. It's like, well, that's not going to be enough for you. You need time to speak to God your Father, and on your own when there isn't that. And maybe it's only 1 minute before you go to bed after putting all the kids to bed. Well, fine. We definitely take enough minutes to check our emails and our texts. It seems like we can take those minutes to at least one or two of them to talk to God before we go to bed. So as much as possible, we deal with the family situation. Don't give up on it. And then, we have to get rid of things that harm our concentration. What might those be? Well, reading usually helps us concentrate, and working on projects does, and exercising actually helps us concentrate, and studying, but the things that don't, technology. It forms irregular mental patterns. And the more we're on screens, the harder it is for us to concentrate. Very few people won't admit that today, even if we don't like to. A little illustration of that, I remember when we were in the seminary, obviously you're going for months and months without, sometimes not even ever seeing a screen. Your first couple of years, there's not even any need for you to ever use a computer, so you don't. And obviously we're not watching movies and stuff. And I remember maybe 2 or 3 years in, going home on vacation, and it's like, okay, the family, we're gonna watch a movie. Yeah, okay, great. And you watch the movie the night before, and I get up the next morning, and it's time for morning meditation. Seminarians and priests do mental prayer every day, and without even wanting it, all I could see every time I closed my eyes was just like images of the movie, because it was like the longer the brain is removed from like the technological flashing, the more sensitive it gets to it, because it's not used to that huge overload, that huge sensory overload. And so when we get back into it, it's like, oh my goodness, I can't even like, whew. Now multiply that little scenario by how many hundreds of times we're always staring into a screen, always watching the next thing. And especially if it's something inappropriate, we're grafting all of that onto our brain. And if after all that we come and say, yeah, I just can't pray, I can never concentrate, it's not God's fault. We have to remove some obstacles, and it means less screen time, and the less the better. Quite frankly, especially if we can say there's some sort of connection between my inability to concentrate for more than a half an Hail Mary and technology. So for concentration, we practice, we remove obstacles, and the better our concentration, the better our prayer, in a sense. Lastly, as far as practical things that can help us build a habit of prayer, time, structure. That's what we said last time. We have to put time in our day. We have to make time, just like we do for everything else, from the dentist to cooking dinner to whatever it is. This is an essential part of our life, and we have to make time for it. Schedule time. Find a time when you have 3 minutes and the kids aren't demanding your attention. I know it's possible. And maybe it's only because they're finally sleeping. Well, you missing out on whatever. You know what I'm saying. Please structure, schedule, and we have to give it practical details. The idea of just like, oh yeah, I should pray more. That's all right. It's never going to be enough. When, where, how. Be human. Do the human thing to make it happen. If you're practicing concentration and time, if you're starting with realizing you're speaking to a person, if you have a purpose and you have a goal of your prayer, okay, now we're talking about something really real here, and we can use our vocal prayer that much better and use those words to concentrate. And maybe all it comes down to is halfway through the third sorrowful mystery, you were able to start concentrating for one Hail Mary on really the crown of thorns, and all of a sudden something strikes you and wow, thank you, because you didn't need to do that. Please help me to carry my cross. And maybe that's all it is. Maybe there was one little act of will in that whole rosary, but that's prayer. That's real. And that's why we use those vocal things and the images and stuff to kind of put us in that mindset to be able to make an active prayer. And so all this, we do those, especially the concentration and the time, making time for it. That's how we're going to form habits. And this is us just doing our human side, and there could be no growth in our spiritual life without it. We have to do the wiring before the house can light up. Well, it's already longer than I intended to go, as usual, I guess. Just 2 things to close it off. And I think Father Anderson is planning on talking about the liturgy, unless maybe he already did. I forget everything. As far as raising our kids, and I'll talk to Father perhaps, because I think talking about the liturgy as a prayer and the highest form of prayer in its own sense, because it's the prayer of Christ, is really worth us really understanding for the sake of raising our children. And Father Rutledge mentioned it as well in his talk about Vespers. So the liturgy is a huge part of our learning to pray and our sanctification, of course. And the last thing is what we mean by when we say, like, have the intention, make an intention, offer that up, whatever it is, consecrate that. What does that mean? Why is that possible? That, oh, well, you just broke your toe, offer it up for somebody. How does that work? Well, we apply it to anything we do. We can say that anything we do is meritorious, but it's all because we have our Lord Jesus Christ living and loving and acting through us insofar as we're in the state of sanctifying grace. If our soul is in the state of grace, that means that our Lord Jesus Christ, God, is now sharing who and what he is and what he does, because it's the same thing as who he is, with us. We have a participation in the life of God himself when we're in the state of grace. And that means when I'm offering a prayer for someone, Christ is offering that prayer with and through me. And his merits are perfect. Mine are not. They're human. But when they're joined with his, I have everything. And so if I have a little suffering that I can join to the suffering of Christ, now my little suffering is becoming meritorious with the merits of Christ. That's why we can apply that to everything. That's why we can consecrate everything. And really, because it's our free ability to make an intention. Why am I doing this? Why am I getting up today? And why am I going to have to go face the world and do all the things that are hard? It's because I can love. And I can love with Christ loving through me. And that's worth something. It really is worth something. We're not much by ourselves. In fact, by ourselves, we're nothing. But if Christ is living in me and I join my intention to that for someone specific or to put it in the hands of Our Lady, that's something. And that's why we can say we can and have to pray every day and always. What is there in our life that can't be connected to a prayer, an approach towards God, a uniting with his love, some sort of communication and sharing and presence and love? What is there in our life that we can't connect to that except sin? Nothing from, having a good drink at the end of the day of apple juice or, changing diapers and doing the laundry. Everything can be connected to supernatural love of souls. And so everything can be worth it. Everything can be a prayer. And that takes a huge burden off of us and makes everything a lot more real and bearable and peace-giving. We really can make everything a prayer by uniting that intention to it, by consecrating it. And we're going to do that a whole lot easier and progressively better the more we can progressively work on our habit of prayer, of being able to approach God and confidently go to him. So prayers to you, and please keep us in your prayers. And hopefully this has been something that will help your spiritual life. God bless.